My name is Ron Smith. I'm a regional political coordinator for the New York State United Teachers, or NYSUT. And on behalf this space here is where, this building actually is where our Suffolk regional offices are located, up on the 3rd floor. And this room here is always available to us for a variety of functions and meetings like this one here. I'd also like to thank all of you for joining us today in our continuing efforts to try to adequately fund education in New York State. Over the last several years, you all know that this has been a particular challenge for all of us, as public education has had to deal with really a kind of a double hit. You know, over the past several years, because of the way the economy's gone, because of state deficits, we've seen resulting cuts or limited growth in support of education from the state. On the one hand, there's been less money coming from the state. On the other hand, we've also been that's been coupled with a devastating tax cap that clearly limits the resources that districts can raise locally. Because of decrease in state aid, because of tax cap, we're finding districts now just struggling to survive. We're seeing the erosion of programs. We're seeing large numbers of layoffs. I mean, our organization has seen a decrease of 30,000 members in the last 5 years. New York State United Teachers, we have over 600,000 members. We've decreased that many. That has been a direct impact of what's been happening as far as inadequate aid from the state and the tax cap. This year, we're hoping things could be a little bit different. One of the things that makes this year different is that the governor claims there's a surplus, and that's the first time we've seen him talking about a surplus in a long time. The problem is that the governor wants to put this surplus into tax cuts and rebates. And obviously what we believe is that this money should be directed to help education, help our communities. And if we're going to make this change, if we're going to redirect this aid, we're going to need your help. I'd like to turn this over now to Lisa Tyson. Lisa is one of our strongest allies here on Long Island. Lisa is the director of the Long Island Progressive Coalition, and she'll fill you in a little bit more on today's program. And thank you for being here.
Thank you, Ron. Very happy to be here. So happy you all came. And for those of you in the back of the room, if you want to move on up, you'll be able to see better. And we can get a little closer. That would be wonderful. You know, Long Island Progressive Coalition is an organization we've been around since 1979. And basically, we believe in social, economic, and racial justice. And on Long Island, you know, we've seen battle after battle after battle in these areas, and we keep losing. And this state budget this year really just slaps us in the face once again. And so that's really why we're here today. You know, when I think of a teach-in, my mind goes back to the 70s and Vietnam War protesting before my time, right? But the whole concept of a teach-in really is to learn about what's happening and then to figure out how to act on it. And so that's exactly what this forum's about. We're not just going to talk, we're going to act today too. Because if we just talk, we're not going to get anywhere. We need to build power, work together, you know, and there's people from unions, young people, people from community-based organizations here, environmental groups. I mean, there's such a great spectrum of people. If we put our power together, we will have people power, like in the 70s. Sorry, I'm out of breath because I'm a little pregnant. So, the agenda for today is we're going to first see a PowerPoint from Mike Kink from Strong for All. I think this is your 4th tour this week, right? He's been going all across the state. Excellent PowerPoint. It really explains to us what is going on. Because if you read the papers, you don't hear the horrific budget that the governor has put in front of us. Your average neighbor has no clue. They think everything's fine, right? They don't realize that basically he's giving money and redistributing wealth to the wealthy, again. Then we're going to have questions and answers for you. There's a lot of questions, I'm sure. Then we're going to talk about the immediate actions you could do and our strategy statewide in these different areas. And then we're going to take a picture together. because we want to make sure that our power is shown together. And then we're going to break up into action centers, and someone's going to explain that. So you could actually do some actions today, so that when we leave, we're going to have so much done that we really get to build on this campaign. So let's start off with this excellent PowerPoint from Mike.
Thanks, Lisa. Thanks, Ron. And thanks all of you for coming out on Saturday morning to think and talk and act on some of these important issues. We've been doing teach-ins and community gatherings all over the state. This week I was in Syracuse, Rochester, the Bronx, and out here this morning. And I want to talk about the tax and the budget issues in this year's budget. I want to talk about this year's state legislative session, but I also want to put it in this broader context of inequality, because we are in a real dire situation with our economy nationwide, but particularly in New York. New York has the worst income inequality in the country. There is nowhere else in America where there's a bigger division between the rich and the poor. So the United States is the most unequal country in the developed world, right? All the advanced nations have a fairer distribution of wealth and resources than we do. They have better funding for schools across the board. They have fairer resources for local government services across the board. There's less of a burden on working people and a fairer burden on the people that are doing well. But in New York, we're worst in the country. And this is an economic fact. It's not rhetoric, right? It's not class warfare. This is reality. And if you look at New York, you know, even back in the 80s when Mario Cuomo was governor, we had a division. You know, there were poor people, there were middle class people, there were wealthy people. But you look at the difference between the Mario Cuomo era and the Andrew Cuomo era, and you see the incomes of the top 1% soaring to almost $2 million on average, right? So if we had 100 people in a room, one of them would be making about $2 million. And all the rest of us would be, you know, 5 of them would be making that higher number, and all the rest of us would be down in the lower percentages. That 99% and the 1% is not just a Occupy Wall Street slogan. This is an economic fact. In the last 30 years, the income of the top 1% has gone up 368%. That's the top 1%. And then the bottom half of the population, we've actually seen our income go down, right? So if you're seeing stuff about this, if you're feeling stuff about this, this is reality. This is not rhetoric. This is not left versus right. These are the facts on the ground. In New York, we have atrocious child poverty all over the state, particularly upstate. The upstate cities are in really, really rough shape. Over half the kids in most of our upstate cities and metro areas are living in poverty. You know, we have record levels of homelessness in New York City, and there is a lot of homelessness across the rest of the state as well. The economy is only growing low-wage jobs, right? It's the only area of job growth. We're losing high-wage jobs. We're losing medium-wage jobs. The only new jobs that we're creating are in low-wage industries. Less and less jobs with a fair wage. Now, we'll talk later. New York is spending $7 billion a year in corporate welfare and subsidies. That's billion with a B, $7,000 million. And this is what we're getting for it. We're getting only low-wage jobs. We're getting fast food jobs. We're getting big box retail jobs. We're getting the kind of jobs where way too often you work full-time and you're stuck in poverty. So the question is, how do we get here? It's not because the labor and community activists in Suffolk County at church basements and union halls got together and developed all the government policies for the state. The fact is that it was Wall Street and the 1% that set the priorities, right? This is a specific set of goals that was developed by think tanks, that was developed by policy experts. I've seen good people in both parties, but in large case, it was mostly executed by the Republicans, but there's plenty of Democrats that went along with it and helped make it happen. They had specific goals, right? To cut taxes for the rich, to cut government budgets and services for the rest of us, to increase that corporate welfare, those subsidies that we're giving to big companies for pretty much what they do anyway, and to move the profits from the businesses up to the CEOs and the executives, away from the workers and the folks on the front line. So that is where we went, right? They took us the specific direction they wanted us to go. We have cut state taxes 40% for millionaires and billionaires over the last 30 years, right? So when there's a lot of people whose taxes are too high. There's no question about it. There's a lot of families, working families, middle-class people that pay too much in taxes. But millionaires and billionaires do not have anything to complain about. I would guess that no one in this room has seen their taxes go down 40% in the last 3 decades. But their taxes have gone down substantially. We have cut 90,000 public sector jobs. School teachers, local government workers, snowplow drivers, crossing guards, folks who do maintenance at the public buildings. All of those jobs have been lost. Many of those jobs are middle-class jobs. Communities of color are heavily overweighted in public sector employment, so communities of color have been hit harder by the loss of public sector jobs. And at the same time, we're spending $7 billion a year in corporate welfare. One state, just New York, billion with a B, $7,000 million we give out to companies. You know, IBM, you saw Governor Cuomo do his press conference with IBM this week talking about protecting jobs. IBM has never kept a single job creation promise that they've made in the last 20 years. They have gotten over $1 billion from New York State. And in many cases, they promised to create jobs and they cut jobs and they kept the money, right? So we have another deal this week. Good luck, Governor Cuomo. I hope you have success where all the others didn't. But we keep giving these companies money and they keep giving us the shaft. The fact is, at these businesses, profits and productivity are up. And, you know, this is something we could talk about more. I mean, it's kind of focused on the state budget and stuff, but part of the deal here is that businesses are making record profits and workers are very productive, right? So the companies are moving all of that pay into CEOs and executives. Regular people's paychecks are flat or down, but the CEO pay and the stock prices have gone up. So inequality, because of economic reality, because of the suffering that people are facing, has become a big deal, right? De Blasio got elected mayor of New York City based on his effort to, you know, separate the tale of two cities and try to do something that works for everybody, right? The Pope was talked about income inequality. President Obama called income inequality the defining challenge of our time, right? What we do about this is going to define how people look at the early part of the 21st century. There's one guy who has been missing from this equation, right? There's one guy who didn't say a word about the inequality crisis in his State of the State speech. There's one guy who didn't say a word about inequality during his budget presentation. You know, if we are in a tale of two cities or a tale of two New Yorks, there's a real question about which New York Andrew Cuomo cares about and which New York Albany cares about. His budget, as Lisa mentioned, very clearly stands with Wall Street and the 1%, not with Main Street and the rest of us. Specific big things in this budget help the people that are already doing fantastic and hurt those of us that are already suffering. With all these problems we have, his biggest priority for 2014 is $2 billion in new tax cuts that are targeted directly to the wealthiest New Yorkers. Schools are struggling to maintain teachers and programs. Counties are struggling to maintain essential services. Critical programs for the hungry and the poor and the sick have been cut, but millionaires and billionaires and bankers are getting a windfall. That is the Cuomo budget for this year. So, you know, I hate to make it personal, but it says a lot about who you are, right? A budget is a moral document. A budget is a philosophical document. You know, this is a really important election year, And it seems as though Governor Cuomo is standing with the people that give the most money to his campaign rather than the people that need help in the majority of New Yorkers, right? I don't know if you saw, but Governor Cuomo has raised 99% of his campaign funds from people who gave $1,000 or more. So if you can afford to throw $1,000 at a politician, you're going to get the policies that work for you under this administration. The fact is that this budget would make inequality worse, right? If we have the worst income inequality in the country, this is going to make it worse. New tax cuts for the rich and new budget cuts for everyone else. Tax cuts for the rich are trickle-down economics, right? That was the Reagan thing. Like, let's just give a bunch of money to rich people and, you know, they'll become job creators and they'll do everything fine. And the fact is it hasn't worked. You saw the economic reality, right? The wealthy people got more and more money and we got more low-wage jobs. And we got cuts in our essential services locally. We got cuts in our schools. We got higher property taxes. They got their taxes cut 40%. And we got household budgets that can't stretch to meet what we have to do to feed our kids and clothe our families, send kids to college. It just doesn't add up. So, you know, if you just give a bunch of money to rich people and hope it works out well, Pope Francis said that that is a crude and naive trust in the goodness of those wielding economic power, right? That's just trusting that those guys that have been giving us only low-wage jobs and taking all the corporate welfare and taking all the pay for themselves are going to do right this time. All of a sudden, they're going to do the right thing for our communities. And, you know, His Holiness Pope Francis told us that that's a bad idea, right? It wasn't some left-wing maniac talking to you on Saturday morning. It was the Pope in the Vatican. Cuomo wants to give $1 billion a year in new tax giveaways that only goes to millionaires, billionaires, and Wall Street. So he wants $2 billion in tax cuts. There's $1 billion of it that is specifically reserved for millionaires and billionaires and Wall Street. We'll talk about that in a bit. He wants this property tax freeze. And there is a real property tax crisis, but the freeze is not the right way to go with it. The freeze is a mechanism that's specifically designed to give the biggest benefits to the wealthiest families in the biggest houses. And I understand that Long Island has high cost of living, that people have slightly more expensive houses out here, that the kind of structure of what people are going to afford is different than other parts of the state. But the fact is that the property tax freeze would give people that own multi-million-dollar houses thousands and thousands of dollars in benefits, and would give people that own kind of middle class, working class type houses 30, 40, 50 bucks. That's the freeze. You might or might not get it depending on what all your various local governments do. The person who lives across from you might get a different benefit than you do depending on the different districts and localities that you're involved in. But the freeze will always provide the biggest benefit to the people with the most money. It's exactly the opposite of what you would do if you want to address inequality and help the people that need the help the most. So we'll talk a little bit about alternatives to that. So we're going to take one more close look at the budget and ask which New York does Andrew Cuomo really care about, the wealthy and the well-connected, or the rest of us? Here's the $1 million that's reserved for millionaires and billionaires and Wall Street, right? There's a cut in the estate tax, the inheritance tax. Currently, the estate tax only applies to estates of $1 million or more. It's only paid by people that have over $1 million in assets. There are plenty of ways that you can protect trusts, that you can do estate planning, that you can get resources you need to live on if you're older or retired, if the family members reserve money for grandkids and stuff like that. $1 million taxable estate probably started out as several $1 million in assets. It's not just a house. It's a house and some stocks and some bonds and some investments. It is a big pile of money. So they want an estate tax cut of $750 million a year. And just like the freeze, the overwhelming majority of that money would go to the 200 richest families in New York, right? So even if your parents or grandparents were good enough to save a bunch of money and, invest it well, again, you might get a little benefit. The Real Housewives of New York and the Park Avenue, folks, they are going to get the vast majority of that $750 million. And that's how he wants to go. So Cuomo says there's a surplus, like Ron said, right? We could either invest it back in communities, but no, we're going to give it to the 200 richest families in New York. $350 million in new tax breaks from the elimination of our dedicated bank tax. New York has a bank tax. It was created in 1971, particularly when New York City was crumbling and like the labor folks and the Wall Street folks all got together, said everybody's got to pitch in, we got to do something to shore up the finances of the state. So they started a bank tax, not huge confiscatory bank tax. Banks are doing fine. They're making more profits than ever in human history. They're paying the biggest bonuses they ever have. They have come back since the crash and they're doing great. We're getting rid of our bank tax and we're giving them $350 million in new tax benefits. We're going to tax them at the lower rate, the corporate franchise tax. That's the car repair shop and the Quickie Mart pay that, right? So we're going to tax J.P. Morgan and Goldman Sachs like we tax the sporting goods store down the street. And we're going to continue the $7 billion in corporate welfare. There's not a lot of reform there. And we get $7 billion in new austerity cuts. That's the part that Lisa talked about, right? Did anyone tell you that Cuomo's budget has $7 billion in new cuts? So if you've had a lot of cuts to your local schools and your food banks and your housing programs for homeless people and your local government funding in recent years, you're getting $7 billion more, right? This is literally taking from the poor to give to the rich, taking from the working class to give to the rich. So he's saying specifically, I got these tax cuts, I'm going to revive the economy. And then he's like, well, then I'm going to cut a whole bunch of services for everybody else, right? He is not telling you the details of what's going to get cut, right? This is an automatic machine for making inequality worse, for cutting working and middle class people and driving the benefits to the rich. So we don't have a chance to address our unequal school funding, right? We don't have a chance to address the fact that colleges become so unaffordable. We don't have a chance to rebuild our local governments and staff them up to the place where they need to be to deliver the services that people expect. And the safety net keeps getting cut, right? We have this record child poverty, we have this record homelessness, and we have cut the safety net by $1 billion over the last several years. So similarly, we have no way to address the child poverty, the hunger, the homelessness, the unemployment. All of these austerity cuts will cut more middle-class jobs, more teachers, more public sector workers, more folks working at nonprofits and frontline service agencies. And we're going to keep with this low-wage jobs where, you lose your middle-class job as a teacher and maybe you get a job at Target, right? I mean, that is the reality. And we're going to keep going with this. This does not turn that around. His budget works for the wealthy and powerful, but there is a different way to go, right? Part of what we're doing here as we go around the state is talking to folks like you and getting you to talk to your elected officials to say there are alternatives. You don't have to do it this way. You could do it a different way. First of all, you want to stop those tax cuts for the wealthy. It just does not make sense to give $2 billion to folks who are doing fine. Then we need to move in a different direction. And we'll talk about some of the details. If you had fair taxes, if you had better budgets, if you boost wages of working people, if you create more jobs, if you end that corporate welfare, if we take specific steps to make sure we educate all children, if we pass universal pre-K everywhere in the state, but passing that pre-K program that de Blasio wants is good. It actually helps Long Island. We'll talk about that a little bit. If we support the dream for immigrant college students who want a shot at going to college and helping their families move forward, if we take specific steps to boost communities of color, if we fight poverty and hunger and homelessness, and we build stronger democracy and stronger communities, we can address income inequality. There's a specific way to make things better. First, on fair taxes, if we stop that $1 billion giveaway to millionaires and billionaires in Wall Street, if we take that estate tax and the bank tax, let's just choose not to do that, right? It does not make sense, given that extreme income inequality, to provide more favors for the folks who are already doing well. So, if I were one of you, I would ask my state senator, I would ask my assembly member, just stop with the estate tax and the bank tax. It will not help our communities. Don't put it in the budget. And then we need a different way to go on property tax relief, right? We need to get some relief to the families that have the biggest difficulty paying their property taxes. And a circuit breaker is a way to target resources to the folks who are most in need. It will either reduce your property taxes when the bill comes to you, or it could provide you a check like the politicians like to do. They like to send you a check and say, hey, I sent you a check, right? But you would target that funding to the folks that have the most trouble paying their bills. You would look at the percentage of your income that you have to pay in property taxes, right? So, there are 750,000 people in New York that make less than $100,000 that pay over 20% of their income in property taxes, right? That's, 20 cents out of every dollar you have to pay to property taxes before you survive, and you're making, less than six figures a year, right? It does not make sense to give, the folks that are living in the huge houses the big benefits. They may have tight budgets. I don't deny that many of them do. But when folks on a restricted income, when seniors, when folks that have lower incomes and have homes that they own are crushed by property taxes, those are the folks that need the most help. So a circuit breaker can direct the most resources to the folks whose budgets are most pressed. That would be a better way to spend $1 billion in property tax relief. And that's going to be a fight. I think the Assembly majority Democrats are headed in that direction. I think a lot of the members from both parties have raised serious concerns about the freeze, about its impact on schools, about its impact on local governments. So there's going to be a real fight on that. And a circuit breaker sounds like a technical thing, but basically it's sliding scale property taxes, right? If you have lower incomes and you have real difficulty making your property taxes, you might get some help from the state. And if you make more money and you can afford to pay more, then, you might get no help or less help from the state. That's the kind of thing that can make inequality, it can reduce inequality. It can make the tax situation more fair. We need better budgets. We need to take steps to grow the economy from the ground up, right? We need to invest in our schools. We need to invest in our infrastructure, roads and bridges, mass transit, local jobs, clean energy, just getting the green jobs retrofit program rolling out here. But, folks can save a heck of a lot of money on their utility bills. We should be retrofitting public buildings. We should be reducing greenhouse gases and creating a lot of, construction, middle-class jobs by doing that. If we fight poverty and homelessness, we'll be meeting community needs and we'll be rebuilding services that need to be there. We need to help folks. And, if we cut the corporate welfare in half and we took that other $1 billion from the estate tax and the bank tax, we'd have $4.5 billion that we could invest in these things every single year. That goes a long way, right? If you give it in the trickle-down, crude and naive trust to the rich people, they're going to buy a $10,000 armoire for their bedroom or a $150 million painting for their mansion on Park Avenue, right? You put the money into local schools and local services, you're rebuilding the strength of local communities, you're creating middle-class jobs, you're putting more money in people's paychecks, you're reviving the local economy, right? So when you make inequality, when you reduce inequality, you actually strengthen the local communities. We need higher wages, right? We raised the minimum wage last year, but we really didn't do much of anything to get people out of poverty, right? We're going to have a $9 minimum wage a year and a half from now, and that still won't get people who work full-time out of poverty. So there's two things that we can do. Number one, the Assembly Speaker Sheldon Silver is talking about accelerating that minimum wage increase to $9 right now, and we should do that. We should get that up as fast as we can. The other thing we're doing this year in Albany is trying to make New York one of those states where cities and counties can set a higher minimum wage to meet local needs than the statewide rate. So the statewide minimum wage would be a floor but not a ceiling. Like in California, You know, San Francisco has their cities and counties can set a higher minimum wage to meet local needs than the statewide rate. So the statewide minimum wage would be a floor but not a ceiling. Like in California, you know, San Francisco has a $12 an hour minimum wage. San Jose just went forward with a $12 minimum wage. Other parts of California have slightly lower wages, right? And SeaTac outside the Seattle airport, they just went up to $15, and the mayor of Seattle is doing $15. In New Mexico, in Washington, in California, a lot of other states, you can take steps at the local level to set a higher minimum wage that could meet your local needs. It would probably happen in Nassau and Suffolk and New York City, maybe Westchester, maybe, you know, Albany and Rochester and Syracuse and Ithaca and places upstate. It doesn't leave other workers behind. The states that have done this have had the experience of a bunch of local increases then leading to a statewide increase, and more discussion among the public and politicians of what it means to get really low wages and how government should go to bat for people that need more money in their paychecks. So that's a fight that we're working on. And then we want to get rid of this Walmart subsidy. I don't know if any of you guys saw last year when we raised the minimum wage, but we created a totally irrational and unneeded subsidy for companies that hire teenage workers at the minimum wage. Walmart gave $400,000 to one of the Senate parties, and I won't name which one it was, and they got a tax break specifically from that party, insisted on doing it as part of the deal that will benefit them to the tune of $36 million per year, right? So they invested $400,000 in campaign contributions, and they got $36 million per year. We got to pull that subsidy out. If we invest in infrastructure, if we build affordable housing, if we do those clean energy retrofits and expand solar renewables, those are things that are going to create jobs. And we need to create jobs, right? And we need to create better jobs than we're creating now. If we just go with the crude and naive trust in the people that have power, we're going to keep getting those low-wage jobs. But if we take specific steps to invest in things that we know, take skilled labor, take people with, you know, education and training, and put them to productive use, those are going to create more jobs with better wages. We need to end corporate welfare, okay? There is a piece of legislation that is up in Albany this year called the Jobs Act. It's a two-point plan. It's not even a three-point plan. It's a two-point plan, right? We have $7 billion in corporate subsidies. Some of them are public, some of them are secret. Some of them are online, some of them are obscure. The Jobs Act would take all of those subsidies and put them online so everybody in New York could see what they were. If you're a corporation that gets a subsidy, you could punch in the company, you could see it, there'd be a full list online, regional area, you could look around here and see what it was, and any job creation promises that were attached to it. So if somebody gets an IDA subsidy, if someone gets a bond, if someone gets loans, if someone gets a county or a city or a state tax break, that would all be online, as would their job creation promises. And the second step is a money-back guarantee for taxpayers. If you don't create the jobs, you got to give the money back. They should stop picking our pockets. They should stop getting the subsidies and not creating the jobs that they promised. And taxpayers should get a money-back guarantee. That is not the law right now, right? Like I told you, IBM got $1 billion, cut jobs, laughed all the way to the bank, right? Your taxes go up, they got $1 billion. We need to educate all children. I'm glad NYSUT's in the house, AQE people are in the house, LIPC people are in the house. You know, we have a serious problem with unequal school funding in this state. We need to bring all the schools in the state up to the high level of quality achievement that was mandated by the Campaign for Fiscal Equity lawsuit settlement, right? We took basically 1 year of funding that and aiming towards fair school funding, and then, like, you know, we cut the parachute and we plummeted down, 20,000 feet and crashed into the earth, right? So again, we have a chance to come up for air here. We have a chance with this supposed surplus to rebuild these schools. We should not cut them. We should start rebuilding them. We should close the opportunity gap, and we should make sure that all school districts have strong funding. We need to take specific steps to boost communities of color. The income inequality that we're suffering has a disparate impact among blacks and Latinos and Asians. We need more jobs, and more public sector jobs, more private sector jobs, all those jobs with better wages, particularly for youth. If we make those investments, if we take specific steps to strengthen small business and support minority businesses, those businesses are going to thrive, those communities are going to do better. The universal pre-K fight is kind of a high-profile thing in Albany this year. De Blasio's plan is pretty simple. I want to tax millionaires to make sure that all 4-year-olds get a preschool education that's high quality, full day. You ready to roll it out? He's got millionaires for the millionaires tax, right? He's got all these like high-profile millionaires saying it's only a latte a day. I would pay that. I would pay $900 a year, me, Mr. Millionaire, so that kids from all over the city could get pre-K, right? Cuomo says it's unfair, he doesn't want to tax millionaires, and he tries to convince people that somehow that plan hurts kids in Buffalo or Albany or Suffolk County, which is ridiculous. De Blasio is basically saying, I'll pay for 40% of the kids in the state by taxing my millionaires, and they're cool with it. They're okay. They're not giving me political flack. I got elected mayor. I said I was going to do this. I want to do this. And then, Cuomo, we can use your money to pay for pre-K for all the other kids, right? If Cuomo has a plan that he says would provide pre-K to all the kids in the state, how is that not going to be improved by taking 40% of those kids and, paying their bills? So you need like a plus and, not an either or. It's not the Cuomo plan versus the de Blasio plan. It's like the de Blasio plan plus the Cuomo plan gets you way closer to where you need to go. If we end up with just the Cuomo plan, it's pretty much smoke and mirrors, right? He took some money from the schools to say he was investing in universal pre-K, and he was investing about 10% of the money that you actually need to do universal pre-K. So cut through that. Don't let him pit New York City against the rest of the state. Do it all. Do the de Blasio thing, do the Cuomo plan. And early education is ridiculous, right? The Federal Reserve says it should be classified as an economic development program, right? It serves kids, whatever, right? You get $12 of economic return for every $1 you invest in early education. It is a better deal than any of that money we give to the corporations. So it's something that works, it's something that pays off for taxpayers, and it's something that fights inequality over the long term as we help all kids get a good start at a strong education. Supporting the dream is an important part of this, right? There are thousands and thousands of young people who are part of immigrant families who have high grades, high scores, ready to go to college and do well, can't get in, can't get low-cost tuition, can't get scholarships that they would otherwise be eligible for, simply because their parents are undocumented. And you can go to college and get scholarships in Texas under hardcore right-wing Governor Rick Perry. You can go to college and get scholarships in New Jersey under Republican presidential candidate Chris Christie. But you cannot go to college and get scholarships here in New York with Andrew Cuomo, Mr. Progressive Governor, right? So, I understand the unaffordability for college for everybody. Most of my paycheck is going to a university right now for my oldest son. And I know there are people that are far more strapped than I am. So I don't think that the DREAM Act needs to be pit against anything else. We need, and we have the money and the resources to make sure that college is more affordable for everyone, and it should be accessible to kids whose parents are immigrants. Fighting poverty and hunger and homelessness is something that Andrew Cuomo used to do for a professional living in life, right? There was a time when he built housing from the ground up for homeless people. There was a time when he was a Secretary of Housing and Urban Development when he expanded affordable housing programs all over the country. There was a time when, like, his political DNA, like his father, was like, we're all in it together and we shouldn't leave people behind. And he hasn't been doing that lately. That's why we put on the milk carton, that's like a picture of him when he was younger. That's the Andrew Cuomo that's missing, right? So we need to take specific steps to house the homeless, to strengthen the safety net, to boost household incomes with some of those efforts to raise the paychecks of people that are working full-time and living in poverty. Those things can reduce inequality, can make the economy more fair, and can kind of rebuild our communities that have been hurt so badly by this division between the rich and the poor. And finally, we can strengthen democracy. You know, there are a lot of things in Albany that get passed because the folks with the money and the campaign contributions make sure they get passed. You know, we talked about Walmart, we talked about all these tax cuts. The banks have not been shy about their campaign contributions, and all of a sudden, we're getting rid of the bank tax, right? So this effort for public financing of state elections has been something that's been working on for a long time. It's one of the few good things that Governor Cuomo included in this year's budget. It's something that not every single group that's involved with this NY Inequality Coalition effort is in favor of, but I know that LIPC and other folks out here on Long Island have been fighting for it pretty hard. I will say that everybody hates corruption in Albany, and when Connecticut passed their public financing law, they had a 50% reduction in the members of the legislature that went to federal prison, right? So, you know, if you are doing something to get more regular people running for office, if you're doing something where the candidates are responsive to the small donors and not the big donors, you're going to get better government and you're going to get less corrupt criminals hanging out in government looking for envelopes full of cash. If we do all this, then we're building strong communities. I mean, that's something that CSEA has been, you know, working on all over the state. Specific steps to improve people's quality of life, right? If you're reducing poverty and homelessness, if you're investing in local services, local schools, infrastructures, parks, roads, bridges, if you're taking specific steps to make sure that public money creates good paying middle class jobs and not all those low wage jobs that we talked about, then you're going to have stronger communities. And that's kind of the end result when you address the inequality crisis. It's the kind of America that we had for a long time, right? And our economy was better. There were plenty of rich people, plenty of fortunes were made after World War II, you know, from the 40s to the 70s. Things were just more fair, and we built the biggest middle class that the world had ever seen. When we stopped doing the things that got us there, we started going backwards when we got the inequality we see today. So this is one of those years where every single member of the legislature counts, right? Assembly Democrats, Assembly Republicans, Senate Democrats, Andrew Cuomo, every single person matters. And so we got toll-free numbers that you can use to call your state senators and your state assembly members. We'll make sure that LIPC and NYSUT and anybody else who wants this can put this presentation up on their websites so you know you can get it and you can use these numbers. We have a text campaign over there. If you see that 877-877, if you text the word unfair to that number, we'll send you some updates, and we will not text you spam on Saturday night asking you to like follow this prescription drug thing to Nigeria or anything, right? At some point there'll be a big showdown. At some point, you know, the Assembly will be coming out with their budget, and they'll either be getting rid of the bank tax or not. And we want everybody in the state who's connected us to say, call your Assembly member now. Tell them, don't get rid of the bank tax. Wall Street's already had enough help, right? That's the kind of thing that we're going to text you if you text 877-877. If you text the word unfair, we'll keep you updated. And, you know, it's a pretty simple ask. Stop the tax breaks for the rich and put the middle class over millionaires, right? We can turn this around. We deserve better than worst in the nation. And there's a lot of great labor and community and student faith groups that are working together on this. We hope to see you again. This will be not the last time I'll be out here. We'll be out here after the session. We'll be out here in the summer, and we'll probably be out here in the fall as these people try to run for office. And, you know, if they do the right thing, they might deserve our support, but if they do the wrong thing, they deserve a hell of a lot of heat, right? We have the worst income inequality in the country. There's specific steps we can take to turn it around. And if we all work together, we're going to start to get the government we need. But it's not going to happen. If we relax, if we sit on our hands, we're going to keep getting that economy that doesn't work for us. Thanks a lot. Yeah. So we got a Q&A thing. If people have questions, comments about any of those points, yes, sir.
You see? And if you want to make a change, then you have to get up and vote for one of your friends. You have people here that you can put in office. They don't have to have no major education. They just have to be fair. So that's what your rally should do, not play games with trying to go down on the 1%, but change the face of it. Like you said, what's this guy in Manhattan? Blasio? De Blasio. He's a friend of the public, okay? So you have Cuomo. He was a wolf in sheep's clothing back then. So you continually went on and on and on. Now, did you vote for him? That's what you have to ask yourself. Did your members vote for him? Then that's what you have there. But you have it right from the presidency to today. When you voted for these people that changed the economy, they all have something to hide. First one was Clinton. He was the one that made the big turn. Then it just kept on going and going and going. Then you have your states. You're giving governors. You can change that anytime you want. You have the power in the vote. But you have to tell that. Don't waste your time going after the big guy with the buck. He would make the business come back here by stopping North American Treaty Act and then forget about the South American Treaty Act that he wants to do, Obama. Because he's just taking jobs away. Those countries have plenty of money in their ground, in oil, and gold, and silver, and diamonds. So they don't need us to support them.
And when we give more tax cuts to those people, they'll invest more in those countries, and that's what...
No, you're wrong. Forget about the tax cut. Forget about it. Just go right after the politician. You said if they started to open the books up there and you'll see all the thieves. Well, yes, that's what he's doing. He's blackmailing every politician up there because he knows they're all thieves. When he was Attorney General, he had shit papers on all of them. So that's where you got to change. You got to start with your audience right here and tell them, you want somebody to have a job? Then stand up and be a trustee for a board. Be a fire commissioner. Be a councilman. Be a governor.
Absolutely.
That's what you got to do. This,
absolutely.
You're not going nowhere
more
with.
regular people in office. Back there.
If I had any hair in my head, I would pull it all out when I heard how, all these injustices, very, very bad. Also, I remember years ago when I worked on my lawn, I worked very, very hard and nothing came up. I found out that the reason nothing came up is because I didn't work it right. Now, in this, what we're trying to do, it's not enough to work hard, we have to work smart. I respectfully disagree with you when you said that every single legislature is equal in the state assembly and senate. I don't believe that's true. The way legislation gets passed is when the majority leader in the senate and the minority leader in the assembly wants to go to the house. If they don't like the bill, it doesn't get voted and it doesn't get passed. So any way that we have, if we want to influence what happens, we have to go after the leaders. Now, for example, Skelos, I'll give you an example of how I feel we have to go after the Skelos. The Skelos is in my district. He wins by 2/3 of the vote. So you can't possibly unseat him. He has all these things for the elderly, for the sick and everything. But I think the way to go to him is not personally, but to convince the people in his district of a particular piece of legislation by saying, look, Skelos is a great guy, he's done all this, and one more thing. So what we need to do is get the people in Skelos district and the Assembly Silver district, convince them to get the people in those districts to go after Skelos and him. Because writing these letters to these other guys, I don't believe will do much good.
I would respectfully disagree with you. I didn't say they were all equal, but what I said was they all count. And the leaders pay particular attention to the members of their conference. Skelos never will lose his election until he retires, but he has many members of his conference that might if they take these politically unpopular decisions. Same with Speaker Silver. He is very attentive to the members of his conference. So I totally agree with you that the leaders are most important. That's why we put their pictures up there. If you're in Skelos' district and you have a direct line to him, that's really valuable. But it is one of the years where the leaders are putting their ears out to hear what the members are thinking, what the members are hearing from their communities. That's why I think it's particularly important to weigh in.
One of the large problems that we have right now when you talk about Skelos or even Cuomo, he's got wonderful sound bites, and you can't it's difficult to educate the masses about what's going on. And when he comes out, a few years ago, when he came out with the 2% tax cap, it sounded great. And Joe Average's taxes were too damn high. My taxes are too damn high too. And then he came out with a 2% tax cap, which is a great idea on paper. And that same Joe Average says, but don't touch my school system.
Right.
Don't touch my program, because my program is a great program. But now I can't raise the taxes in the school district to go above 2%. I have in my district, I have a 4% increase in taxes if I do nothing. If I keep my program exactly the same, freeze my materials and all those kinds of things, I have 4% because I gotta honor all the contracts first. So with a 4% increase and a 2% tax cut, which is 1.48% this year, that's crazy. Well, now his soundbite is, I'm gonna lower your property taxes. It's not even just 2% taxes. I'm gonna lower your property taxes. Joe Average Citizen thinks that's the greatest thing, especially here on Long Island. Joe Average Citizen thinks that's the greatest thing on earth. But what's really happening is he's going to dismantle the school districts. And the UPK, that's a great soundbite too, because it's great that we want to, we want to educate all the pre-K kids. Kindergarten is not mandated. A lot of the people that had full-day kindergarten have moved to half-day kindergarten, so you're going to have UPK, and some districts have no kindergarten, so you'll take a year off, and then start first grade with the Common Core. Great idea. And this has nothing to do with Common Core, but I'm just saying, with the fight that's going on right now, he's focusing on quieting down the Common Core group, he's focusing on quieting down the people who are upset about all different issues, but he's not focusing on his money. And we, as Long Island, have to focus on that 2% tax cap, that gap elimination adjustment, that those are formulas that determine how much money should go to each school district, and then the gap elimination adjustment takes it right on back. So if you're not going to properly fund, we need to have a public campaign that goes out to all of the citizens, so that it's very difficult to fight just saying, go after that one legislator. The letters help, I write them all the time, the letters help, but it needs to be, he's out there on the airwaves, he's on social media, he's on regular media, mass media, he's on everything, just saying, I'm gonna lower your property taxes, and that's a great soundbite.
And where he gets the money is by making those
Yes,
gap
he does.
elimination
That's
adjustments
exactly
work,
right.
It's going to get bigger and bigger so that he can get more money, mostly to wealthy people.
That.
Yeah.
Well, I want to second what she said and maybe go a little bit further. I think money in politics is now changing the politics of every state and our federal elections, and it's very, very difficult for the average person to combat the Koch brothers and the amount of money they're putting in. And the first job of every politician is to get elected. And in order to get elected, you have to have money. If we don't address that, then nothing is going to happen. Number two, I think that liberals and progressives and Democrats in general have to do what the Republicans did on this front. They have a guy named Frank Luntz. And he literally takes word by word, every is, the, and but. And he has focus groups, and he measures people's reactions to every word. So the Republican Party, from Fox News down to Zeldin over here, they use the same words. They focus completely on getting that message across using the same words. Any teacher knows that repetition is the best way to teach. And that's exactly, so they are funded by billionaires. They have a focused message where every word is tested, and they ram it in every day. And we have to find a way to get a message that is focused and get it out there.
I'm with MoveOn.org. I'm John Moore. I'm the coordinator. I'm doing the organizing for National MoveOn.org. We're working on what we call a Long Island Media Task Force. Terry Marone's part of that. What they do is the right wing and have an awful lot of media. The media is the message, and they have an awful lot of power in the media. The money in the media is coming off, and what we did is what we're doing now. We showed 3 films, one called Project Censored, Shadows of Liberty, and Broadcast Blues, which gets the idea that more and more the progressive news is being snuffed out. And what we're doing is this project, and we're trying to right now just start as guests. There's a new, there's a conservative radio station just got out with Sean Hannity and Rush Limbaugh. It's a syndicated radio station out in Suffolk County. And we're going to try to penetrate into them and other local stations to get guests, to get our points of view across. And, all these progressive issues that come across. The media is the message, and right now, a lot of this is saying, we don't know this is happening. And over the public media, we're getting pressured out. We lost Current TV, there's Air America Radio has been lost, and a lot of these conservative stations, MSNBC is the only station that has anything toward that direction. And the other stations are like, everything, and they give everything like it's equal par, like the right wing is just as powerful as the left, and we're both tugging war like this. But it's not. The power on the right is very strong, and you need media to get that going.
Great. Yes, sir.
I'm a simple person, so I have a simple question. I've been a progressive my whole life, and I'm 71 now. But the thing is, comes November in this election, Cuomo knows no matter what we talk about today, and no matter what we do for the next 4 months, he will win re-election as our governor. Because what choice do we have? Comes November, I can't vote for any Republican candidate because it's going to be far worse. It's the mistake we made in 2000 when George W. Bush ran and promised to be a compassionate, and that was the furthest thing he was from. And a lot of us, bought that sort of ridiculous stuff. So in our state, because it has the highest percentage of members of unions, we have about 25%. The state I have another home in, North Carolina, has the worst in the country, 3%. And those folks down there think it's so wonderful and unions are so evil. So that's part of the problem. We were discussing it before the presentation came today, the destruction of the unions throughout the country.
Absolutely.
And the only powerful unions left are the teachers' unions.
Yep.
And now they're trying to destroy those as well.
Yep.
Then there'll be no union strength in the country.
Yep.
So what do we do as a voter? Do we actually vote against Cuomo no matter how bad these things are? And he knows, people like myself, progressives, just cannot bring themselves
Right.
to pull the lever for some rotten Republican candidate in November.
Yep.
So what?
Well, two things I would say. First, stopping the worst of what he's proposing and making it better actually is better for him politically, right? He didn't want to tax the millionaires. We all forced him to tax the millionaires. He became a better governor by doing a fairer tax, right? So, I don't think you just have to say, oh, we're going to lose and we're going to be stuck with it. The second is our friends at the Working Families Party are actually talking about running an alternative to Cuomo, right? I don't know if they're going to do it or not, but they're talking about it. And so there may be someone else on the ballot that's not Cuomo, that is a progressive, if you want to send that kind of protest voice and say, I'm not...
I want to work on the kind of thing you're talking about. So, next steps, I'm going to bring up Blanca Villanueva, who works with the Long Island Progressive Coalition through the Alliance for Quality Education. She's going to talk about the education campaign statewide that connects with this.
Hi, everyone. I'm a little shorter than Mike and Lisa, so I'm going to have to lower it. Okay. So my name is Blanca Villanueva, and I'm the education organizer for the Long Island Progressive Coalition, as well as the Alliance for Quality Education. So it's a mouthful, but work for two great organizations. So Long Island Progressive Coalition, LIPC, has been around since 1979, and we fight for economic, social, and racial justice. The Alliance for Quality Education, AQE, was founded to ensure that all students, no matter where they live, no matter their zip code, receive a high-quality public education. So LIPC and AQE aligned itself when we saw the education system was being unjust. We strive to close the gap between rich and poor communities. Students today are facing many challenges. In the last few years, there have been so many cuts to the education system, it's left it in crisis, and schools have been cut to the bone. As a result, students are suffering. They are not receiving the best possible quality education that they are entitled to. They have been forced to reduce or eliminate sports, music, arts, teachers, as well as other learning programs. Schools like Brentwood can only offer their 1st to 3rd grade students, I believe, music every other 2 weeks, and those same students have never had an art class. Education is a key, but the students are not being invested in. Do you know how much Governor Cuomo is proposing for education in this year's budget? Does anybody know? Well, I'll tell you, don't worry, I got the answer. So he's proposing a $608 million increase. $608 million, it really sounds like a lot, right? It's more than I'm gonna make, but it's really not. It's $608 million, it means cuts to the school system, and it means that we can't restore programs that have been lost. It means 84% of school districts here in Long Island will receive less than they did during the recession in 2008. Central ISUP, which is right around the corner, is looking at a $4 million cut, which is going to devastate an already struggling school system. His proposed budget does nothing to close the gap between rich districts and poor districts that start as early as pre-K. Instead of changing this around, he is proposing over $2 billion in tax cuts to corporations and the wealthy. The youth in our community are worth more than banks and corporations. They are a vital resource in our community and an investment. So why is the governor putting the wealthy over our kids? Who does the governor stand with? Our kids, their future, or the wealthy? We need the state to fund education. In 1993, New York City opened a case against the state called the Campaign for Fiscal Equity. Mike mentioned it. The courts agreed after many years that every child deserves a sound, basic quality education. And that at the time, the state school financial system was underfunding New York City public schools. Unfortunately, because of the economy, we never received full funding. 21 years after the start of the original CFE case, all students are still not receiving a quality education. And we must fight to ensure they do, and ensure students get an early start in universal pre-K. Our economy is building itself back up. So you can't say there's no funding for education when we're providing $2 billion in tax cuts. If we're able to fund that, we're able to get the resources for education. So countless studies show that education is the key to better health, higher rates of graduation, employment, and lower rates of incarceration. That is why AQE organizes statewide from Buffalo to here in Long Island. We are fighting to restore fundings to K through 12 as well as implement universal pre-K. AQE and LIPC were instrumental in getting $25 million last year for pre-K. And this year, Governor Cuomo is stating he's giving $1.5 billion in universal pre-K. But in reality, it's only $100 million this year, and it's not universal. It only covers about 8,000 out of the 225,000 4-year-olds in the state. So he's adding the numbers up. So it's really not 1.5. That's the number that he's campaigning. He's saying 1.5, but it's really not. What he's doing is he's adding $100 million every year for the next 5 years. So the max we're going to be able to get is $500 million, and that's still not enough. We commend the governor for adding pre-K, but it's not enough. We need to take action to provide children with all the opportunities they are entitled to. The state needs to fund our education, and the proposed tax cuts affect us all, as well as education. It is time the governor and legislators make students a priority, not corporations. We need to speak out and take action. I have postcards that you're going to have access to, as well as you can write letters to the editor, sign up for press events. But on March 12th, we're all getting on a bus to go to Albany. We're going to make sure that our voices are heard and that they know that it's not okay to take money away from our school systems in the expense of the education of our kids. We need to take action in order to make a difference in the lives of today's generation. Remember, if we don't speak out, if we don't take action, nothing will change, and children are the ones who will suffer as a result of our lack of action. Thank you.
Thank you, Blanca. That was great. So, so the inequality campaign, right? So, what are we going to do, right? We have until about now and April 1st to make a difference. So we really need to work we have a statewide coalition, and we have a local coalition. The local coalition, CSEA is a big part of it, NYSUT, 1199, CWA, Move On, Jobs with Justice has just joined, and we're looking for more groups to sign on. So if you have a group, we want you to join us. And we also, are really trying to get personal stories. And that really goes to this whole media concept, why, the media has not been telling the true story about this budget. So what we think a strategy in order to really change things are to make sure the media is telling personal stories about how hard it is for people who have been cut in schools, people who are unemployed, people who are just struggling to pay their property taxes. We need those people to write personal stories. And we're going to do all this today. Local elected officials, we're going to be lobbying. We're going to be lobbying the Assembly and Senate, but we're also going to try to get locals to be part of the lobby effort.